Joining us now with this breaking news coverage is Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, Vice Chairman of the Senate Intel Committee. He is part of the Gang of Eight, which was briefed earlier this week on the military operation in Iran. Senator Warner, thank you very much for coming to the weekend.
Thank you.
Our colleague, Michael Schnell, reported on your conversation with the president. But in that, she talked about how Secretary Rubio met with the Gang of Eight. You were a member of a Gang of Eight. And that the Gang of Eight was given a heads up about what was to come yesterday in Iran. Senator Warner, were you given a heads up? Is that how you would characterize the meeting with Senator Rubio?
I would characterize the meetings as this was much better consultation than prior to the other Trump military actions where there was no consultation. I think we got a series of options. Much of the consultation was done before the president had made any final decision. And what I come back to is, the story of why now seems to keep changing. Early in the week, it seemed like this was an attempt to go after Iran's nuclear capabilities, which, by the way, the president had claimed had been obliterated 7 months ago when we took that strike. Obviously, they had not been obliterated. Then it moved into a discussion of Iran's ballistic missile capability that could strike our bases or Israel. And now it seems to have morphed into regime change. So all this means, in my mind, is that there was no imminent threat to America. So the president chose to start this war right now, put our troops in harm's way. He even acknowledged in his video on Friday night that he expects there'll be American casualties. And when the president chooses to take our country to war, the Constitution's clear. He's got to come to the American public and the Congress and get approval. This is not a king. He cannot do this on his own, even though so many of his actions kind of don't reflect the legal approach. But it's absolutely essential right now that he comes and explains what is the goal. I think it's good news that some of the senior Iranian leadership, they were an awful regime, were taken out. But what next? As David Ignatius said, does this mean we're going to have to put American boots on the ground if the Iranian people rise up and the regime starts to brutally murder them? Have we now started another endless war in the Middle East where we are going to get further drawn in? And what is our ultimate goal? I don't know the ultimate goal. I do know this: there was no imminent threat to America. So this was not. This was a war of choice by Donald Trump.
Senator Warner, I want to follow up on something that you just said, which was that there were a series of options that were presented to you and the Gang of Eight. Can you detail some of those other options and whether or not you thought some of them were more appropriate responses?
I'm not going to get into any of the specifics of what goes on in a Gang of Eight. I was concerned that, that there were, obviously Israel has a set of objectives. The United States has a set of objectives. What I want to make sure is that American foreign policy is driven by, first and foremost, by American interests, particularly when we're talking about putting our troops in harm's way.
Senator, who do you believe is driving the car here when it comes to the attacks? Is it Bibi Netanyahu or is it President Trump?
I think that the Israeli concerns were more imminent. Israel has felt for a long time that the Iranian threat was existential. I don't deny that. But also, even in terms of imminent threat to Israel, I was not convinced of that as well. So there was a decision made to make a choice to go to war at this point, put our troops in harm's way. And, so far we've not seen American casualties, but it would be naive for anyone to think that this operation is over. And ironically, if the president, when he made this promise to the Iranian people and drew his own red line, it was back in January when the Iranian people were on the streets protesting against this brutal regime. And ironically, if he had acted then, I'm not sure I would agree, but at least there was a case to be made of supporting the Iranian people. He couldn't act at that point because our military capabilities were stretched, because the aircraft carrier that would have been part of the action was off the coast of Venezuela. And the notion that of our allies who could have helped us in that venture in January, when we all saw the awful pictures of the Iranians brutally murdering their own people, our allies were distracted by Trump's own folly of going after Greenland. So the fact that I think the president somehow thinks all of these things happen in isolation when they are all obviously intertwined, and I fear the president has kind of thought, well, it was easy to do Maduro. It was easy to take the strike against Iran 7 months ago. So this will be easy. I hope the president's right, but I absolutely don't believe that is the expectation of most of the intelligence or military community, that this is not going to be easy when you take out some of the leadership. And the chances are pretty darn high that the people who replace the supreme leader may be even further to the right, more dangerous than the current regime, as bad as it was.
Senator, you said you're not convinced that there was an imminent threat to Israel and or to the United States. So what is the reason you believe that President Trump went to war with Iran?
Iran has been a threat. Iran was trying to reconstitute and build up its both conventional and potentially nuclear capabilities. Over time, would that threat grow? Yes. But why now? Why now versus a month from now, after you could have potentially given the negotiations more time, particularly when it appeared that, at least from the Qataris, who were the mediators, that progress was being made? I don't know. And that's why I think it is the job of the president, when he has chosen to put American troops in harm's way, to come to the American public and to come to Congress and lay out why now, what was the threat, what was the reasoning, and get approval of Congress. The president, this is not some reaction activity. Oftentimes with the War Powers Act, it's after the president has to act because he is responding to something else. This is not a response to. This was an American-driven initiative by bringing this so-called armada into the region and then acting. This was a war of choice, and the president has to describe why he made that choice. I don't have an answer, but I sure as heck know this. Later today, I'm going to be down in Hampton Roads around Norfolk, where a lot of these sailors are deployed, and I know I'm going to be running into their family members, and I can imagine the kind of questions they're going to ask me. Why is my son or daughter potentially in harm's way, potentially to be a casualty of war? What is the reason? And I don't have a great explanation for them.
Senator Mark Warner, we are out of time, but a quick yes or no question. Do you trust the intelligence coming from this administration when it comes to decision-making regarding Iran?
I trust the integrity of the intelligence community. I worry that the pressure on the intelligence community to shade their answers to meet the president's political objectives scares the hell out of me. And my quick comment on that is the evidence was when the general in charge of the Defense Intelligence Agency, who accurately portrayed the bombing, it was successful but didn't obliterate, by saying the truth, he got fired.
Senator Mark Warner, thanks so much for joining us this morning.